Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, The Current State of LGBTQI plus Rights in Costa Rica, Barbados, Haiti, and Guatemala, sponsored by the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University, as well as the Gender and Policy Concentration at SIPA, ELAS, the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia, and last but definitely not least, Human Rights Campaign. I'm Stephanie Greppo, Director of Capacity Building. We are so happy to welcome you today, and we hope that you're all doing well. And I would really like to thank Jean, who is moderating this event today. We are slowly coming back to normal here in the Human Rights Advocates Program. This year's cohort, half hybrid, and so happy to say they are with us now in New York City. We're slowly moving to everything being back in person in New York City. So to this cohort, I want to give a big thank you because they really have gone through a lot with us, especially in trying to get them here. So happy today to turn this over to our 4 advocates and to Jean. Thank you.
Well, that is a perfect way to begin the panel by unmuting myself. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to once again be partnering with the OTRAH program at Columbia University to introduce and to engage and to learn from the amazing advocates from around the world that this program brings together. Once again, we are virtual, but the good news is that probably means that more people can join us online. So wherever you are in the world, welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And the purpose of this session is to really get to know each other better, to learn from these amazing advocates more about the work that they're doing in their own countries, the challenges that they face, and then to see how from each of them, how the work that they are doing impacts more widely the region and LGBTQI plus rights around the world. So we very much hope that you in the audience will engage with us. Please ask your questions. If somebody says something that piques your interest or you don't quite understand or you want to build on, just pop the note right there in the chat, and we will do our best to try to answer that. So my name is Jean Freedberg. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Global Partnerships at the Human Rights Campaign. For those of you who might not know HRC, we are based in Washington, DC. We are the largest LGBTQ plus advocacy organization in the United States. We are proud to say we have more than 3 million members and supporters around the country and around the world. We have been around for more than 40 years now, helping to drive the movement for equality in this country and increasingly working with advocates around the world. Our global program is small, but we are growing. We work with a network of partners and advocates around the world who we are proud to call part of the HRC family. We now number about 180 folks in 90 countries. Roanne on this call is one of our amazing global innovators who has been engaging with us now for the last number of years. And now, of course, everybody else gets to join the family as well. So we support advocates through capacity building, through exchange of ideas, through partnerships in multiple ways. We bring folks together, we convene in regional and international settings, and we offer programs that help us learn from each other. So working with advocates like this is part of what we do. And so I'm thrilled to, why don't we just get straight to it? I'm going to ask everybody to just very briefly introduce themselves, explain a little bit who they are and what they do. We are going to keep this event to the hour. I know everybody on this call is busy. You all have lots to do, and we very much appreciate and value the time that you have taken to be with us today and to share and to come and share with us for the next hour. So why don't I just hand it over to this amazing group. Let's start with you, Danielle, or Danny, as I think you also call yourself. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to?
So I come from. Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Sorry. So I come from Guatemala and I have worked many years as an advocate, but also as a journalist. I started my career as a journalist, and I'm currently the coordinator of the LGBT Reporting Network. We train and help media and journalists across all the Latin American region. And for over 3 years, we have trained more than 120 journalists in a fairer, more just coverage of LGBT issues across the region. So I've been doing all that work and also a lot of campaigning and strategic litigation to get access for more rights in Guatemala. So I'm very excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Danny, and thank you. Let's see, Roanne, why don't we go to you?
Hello, hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here today. My name is Roanne Mohammed. My pronouns are she, her. I am originally from the southern Caribbean islands of Trinidad and Tobago, but I have been based in Barbados in the Eastern Caribbean for the past 11 years. And sorry, I'm an LGBTQI plus activist, but also a feminist. And I've been involved in LGBTQ activism for about the past decade. And in Barbados, I am the founder and director of an organization called She Barbados, which stands for Sexuality, Health, and Empowerment. And it's a feminist LGBTQ organization which specifically focuses on the discrimination and the marginalization of queer women and trans and non-binary people in Barbados in particular, because these people tend to sit at the intersection of patriarchy, homophobia, but also misogyny. And there are a lot of specific issues that come with carrying all of those different identities, particularly around service provision. So our organization has an element where we provide access to services, particularly around sexual and reproductive health and rights for our populations and communities. And I'm also the coordinator of Pride in Barbados. And I coordinated our first Pride in 2018 and then again in 2019 and hopefully again this year, if COVID allows. But yeah, that's about it for me for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Roanne. Lots of follow-up questions arising, I am sure. Dominique, let's hear from you a little bit about you and what you're doing in Haiti.
Hi everyone, my name is Dominique Seville. I'm from Haiti, representing an institution named OTRAH, or Trans Organization of Haiti. We work solely with transgender persons in providing them support in terms of mental health issues or SOGI, and also we try to provide advocacy for gender justice and GBV. We also try to support them in terms of getting their gender identity transformation. And so far, we are really trying to do that, but it's not that easy. I don't know if many people know about Haiti. There's no justice system that recognizes transgender persons. So it is pretty difficult for us to really provide the support that is necessary. But so far, we've been doing the best that we can to surround them and help them in ways that the Constitution or the country does not. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. And yes, of course, our hearts go out to you and all the people of Haiti. We know that the last few years have not been easy for you and your country. And we know and we're aware, and we just want to be sure that you know that we stand with you through all of these challenges. So let's move to Costa Rica and let's hear a little bit from Larissa and the work that you are doing over there.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. My name is Larissa Arroyo Navarrete. I use the pronouns she and her. I'm a human rights lawyer that works mostly on gender and diversities. And even though I have worked with multiple national and regional organizations to achieve legal and political changes, I see myself more like a feminist and a very visible bisexual activist from Costa Rica. And I'm the founder of an NGO called Asociación, Ciudadana, ACCEDER. And I was the director for about 6 years. And the main reason to do that was to have an NGO dedicated to promoting strategic action for human rights, to strengthen the leadership of women and LGBTIQ plus people, but specifically and especially bisexual, lesbian, non-heterosexual women, non-binary people. And also I have been the legal advisor and member of another, not NGO, but like a group that is called Frente por los Derechos Igualitarios. And we also work for equal marriage, among other things. And in fact, we were able to achieve that goal. So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you so much, team.
Thank you, Larissa. You know, a lot of themes are emerging immediately from this conversation, which I'm making note of, because I think we can also look across each of these countries a little bit at how you're dealing with some of the challenges over there. So in this first section, I actually want to ask each of you a little bit about, in your own country, what is some of the areas of progress that you've been able to make? What, of course, the challenges that hold you back? And then also a little bit, if you don't mind, about how your work fits in with the broader LGBTQ movement in your country and how your organization connects to folks that are working perhaps in other areas as well, like trans issues or HIV or you know, media and so on and so forth. So broaden, you know, so talk specifically and then also help us broaden the frame a little bit to understand your situation. So mixing it up a little bit, why don't we, let me see. Let me start with Dominique, if you would like to go first on this section.
That is an interesting question. First, as background, OTRAH is one of the first institution, not to say the only one institution that is working with transgender persons. And we have come with the idea of having such association because at the beginning in 2014, 15, and so we've realized that all the help has been focusing on homosexual persons and institution that LGBTIQ institution, but that are mostly led by homosexual men. And the issue of transgender person was disregarded a lot. And we have tried to do advocacy regarding that issue, but it has not gone too far. So we think that the only way to really put a light on the issues of transgender person was to build an institution that will really accompany them and support them in terms of gender-based violence or justice issues. And so far, OTRAH has been doing great, but it is pretty difficult to have a network of institutions that really want to get involved in what we are doing. And we have realized that not only the global world is seeing trans differently, but also inside of the community, the LGBTIQ community, many of our fellows do not understand what is it to be a trans person, and especially in institution or countries that has colonial backgrounds such as Haiti, it is pretty difficult to see transgender people with their own needs and what would be said that is really different from the other LGBTIQ community. And so far, we have had support from many institutions, specifically institution that works with women, but it is quite often an issue because in Haiti, as soon as you start working with some institution that are LGBTIQ led, they have the tendency to put you in the same box. Like it's because the institution is accepting gay people or lesbian people. So the network is not that easy, but since we've started working with NUD, with a project called Being LGBT in the Caribbean, the Bleak Project, it has shed another light in how different we are and how the networking is really important, especially when we are trying to really connect with the government and see what can be done in terms of juristic panel, so that they could really build something that could help them and focus on the health or also the representation, the juristic representation on transgender persons when it comes to identity in the country. And also we have tried to do network with institutions that work in terms of health issues, but mostly HIV positive persons. And that was the first thing that, not to say the only thing or the only way to really get involved in human rights advocacy issues. And things are starting to shift, but we have to be patient, I guess. And also we have to really double our efforts to let people know that HIV issues is really important because it was a pandemic and it is still striving nowadays. But we have to really embrace the fact that without human rights institutions that are really orienting people in way to see people, human being as human being, it is really difficult, like to really find a way to focus on issues like health or transgender issues, or even lesbian or bisexual persons.
Yeah, thanks, Dominique. I mean, of course, you speak to the toughest challenge that we all have, right, which is changing hearts and minds. However hard we work on the legal and advocacy side, we need to, change the culture around us, and that is the job, and it's very hard indeed. We'll come back. I have some follow-up questions, but let's just keep going around the room for now. Larissa, why don't you talk to us a little bit about Costa Rica?
Yes, well, I think most of the issues we had to advance in LGBTIQ plus rights are quite similar from to the other countries, and it goes beyond like political will to achieve like a change in the legal frame. And I would like to address especially the lack of agreement between all the groups. We still are so diverse. We are not a homogeneous group. We do not understand that we have different needs. And it was some sort of a very hard process to understand that. So, for example, when we started working on equal marriage, we just did that. So it was like we couldn't think about any other problem or issue. And I think at the beginning we could not understand that it was just more about economical interests, and we were not talking about violence, we were not talking about trans people. And at some point we decided that we needed to go forward and to change that. So we decided, for example, that it was important to support trans people and the trans movement in Costa Rica, but not to take the leadership. Because usually the leaderships are more about male gay voices, and I think that's a very common thing all around the world. Mm-hmm. So at some point, that is why we decided to have like another space to just work on the leadership of women and non-binary people that could identify as bisexual, lesbian, non-heterosexual, and all the sexual orientations that might not be in that particular category of male gay voices. And it was I think it was very, very hard, because even some of our members were against like the figure of marriage. So it was like, how can we try to work on equality if we're refusing this unique figure that we have already in our legal frame. So it was kind of very hard there, and also we had to think about the cultural differences and, of course, the religious situation in Costa Rica, because we are a Catholic country. We are the state and the church are not separated. So that means that even the legal frame incorporates a religious part, and it provides some kind of funds to the church that, of course, was trying to like stop all the advances in human rights, especially for LGBTQ plus people. So I think everyone here might relate to that kind of situation. But and maybe later we can talk about this. But I believe that it was the way we were able to have an agreement and to overcome that differences and all those diversities, that we were able to achieve not one but many goals in the past. But maybe I can talk about that later. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Larissa. Roanne?
Yeah, there's so much that that Larissa and Dominique have both shared that I feel is applicable to my context in Barbados as well. And I do think that in order to understand some of the contextual issues that we're facing in Barbados currently, we need to have an understanding and awareness of what has happened in our past, because we do have such a complicated past given our history with British colonialism and the impact that that has really had on sexual and gender minorities today. And we still feel the brunt of that, particularly with the amount of fundamental religious pushback that we're facing when it comes to LGBT rights, and not even just LGBT rights, but the rights of everybody who's at the margins and represents diverse communities. So Barbados was colonized by the British, and they did impose laws which criminalize same-sex intimacy. And we still have those laws today. So I think that's one of our biggest issues that we're facing as a community. And it's not even just about the criminalization of these sex acts, because that's what it criminalizes, sex acts, and not necessarily our identities. But what that does, and the fact that these laws exist, it creates a precedence where people feel that they can treat LGBT people as second-class citizens. And that has been one of the biggest challenges for our community, feeling as though we're othered in our own society, which we contribute to, which we've always contributed to. And I bring this point up often that prior to colonization, many indigenous communities really celebrated, gender and sexual diversity, the people who occupied our lands before colonization. And even some of our ancestors who came from Western Africa and were enslaved through colonization, they came from many cultures which celebrated gender and sexual diversity. So now we're in a situation whereby many people from the global north, particularly like US, Canada, UK, and other European countries, sort of see the Caribbean as primitive or backwards, and feel as if they set the precedent or the standard by which we need to adhere to mark our progress, without really understanding the history of why there's so much tension when it comes to LGBTQI issues within our region. And I feel like that what that does is that it really erases a lot of the efforts and the work and the celebration of our identities that's been happening within the region for many, many decades. So it's important that Dominique raised the issue of HIV, because I feel as though that really did a great job at setting back the movement within the 80s and the 90s, because it instilled a lot of fear in people, and we still see that fear today. And I still think that that fear is a driving factor for people excluding LGBTI people, because similarly to what Larissa mentioned, we're a very Christian country, and there's not a big separation of church and state. So we feel like a lot of people within institutions, whether it be healthcare institutions, within parliament, within the police service, they hold very true these fundamentalist Christian values that are really driven by fear. And we see that in the way that LGBT people are even able to just access services within our country. So I think those are some of the biggest challenges that we're facing. But there's been a lot of progress, particularly within the past 10 years. So when I began advocacy in 2011, I co-founded an organization called Be Glad. And at the time, that was the only LGBT organization on the island. And we're very proud because it was led by 2 young queer women. And it became really evident to us that even though the movement was so dominated by the conversation of cis gay men and HIV, that queer women and trans people have always been on the front lines advocating for all of our rights and pushing to make change happen. And as I began to get deeper into LGBTI movement building, but also feminist work, I realized that there was such a huge fragmentation between these 2 movements, because quite often the LGBTI movement focuses on the experiences of cis gay men, and the feminist movement would focus on the experiences of cis straight women. And there's a whole population of people, queer, trans, and non-binary people, that just end up being left behind and slipping through the cracks, even though quite often we're the ones that are doing the work. And this is why I began my organization, Barbados, because I found it necessary to have a space which particularly focused on our interests and our advocacy. And I mean, even something as simple as HIV, or not as simple as HIV, but something as visible as the issue of HIV, is so focused on the experiences of cis gay men. But for example, in Barbados, we know that 51% of the people who are living with HIV are women. But everybody just assumes that all of these women are straight. How many of the women who are living with HIV and continue to contract HIV are LBQ women? What about trans people? Where are trans men included in this? Where are trans women included in these statistics? And there's a real lack of clear data and evidence around our experiences. So one of the main focuses of our organization has also been research, because people usually need to have data and evidence to validate our experiences, which is unfortunate, but it's necessary. So I think collecting that data and evidence of our experiences, particularly around the issues that we face because of our gender identity and our gender, that's been one of our major priorities. And also pushing back against all of this religious rhetoric that has been really dominant within the past few years. And it was really great to be able to participate in a conference recently that not recently, but in 2019 that HRC had, which spoke about engaging faith-based allies. And that's been a really, really successful strategy for us to engage with people of faith who are allies to our community, because the ones who are in opposition aren't the majority, but they're just the loudest. And I feel like I can speak for the entire hour. So I'll wrap it up there.
Thanks, Roanne. Now, you raised so many challenges that I think really are common to everybody, and we can come back and try to unpack some of them. Danny, you want to
Yes, of course.
add your challenges into the mix?
So I'll start just by sending everyone the link to get a sense of the latest law in Guatemala. And basically what happened is that 2 weeks ago, the Congress passed by a massive approval, a law that criminalized LGBT identities. And it did it in a really subtle way with education, kind of in a similar way we're seeing at some of the states in the United States. But it was a big challenge because it did it in the Women's Day, you know, March 8th, kind of like to protect this thought related and this all this anti-gender agenda that we've seen across different countries happening and fueled by a religious narrative, but also by some sort of like anti-democratic, almost neo-fascist ways. So that's really challenging. And even though that law faced a lot of challenges and it didn't really go through being formally approved and implemented, it shows us that our leaders or political leaders had an agenda and a common agreement against LGBT identities. So just to clarify, it was a lot of, it made a lot of noise that it had a prohibition of same-sex marriage, but we don't have same-sex marriage. But something that did was, for example, stating that the state couldn't defend LGBT identities as normal, that heterosexuality, it was the only normal family value that it could be stated. And this applied for education and other more structural aspects, maybe that specific rights in a way, or you know, we don't have marriage, so marriage is not that big of a bust for us. But having our identities being criminalized at education and at state responses in formal settings, that really set us back in a way. So that's the latest that has happened. But to go back and understand a bit of Guatemala, we need to understand that Guatemala, in fact, it's really diverse. We have a large indigenous population, and we live with different nations trying to get sense and make a country, right? So I think that that tension really fuels our living. And also we lived in a time, we had a really big civil war, 36 years. So we live really in a culture of silence. And at times I do this joke that even though there's a big closeted culture in Guatemala, it's not just the LGBT people that are closeted. You know, we are afraid of speaking up. We are afraid. We have this historically oppressive culture. So it's really hard, you know, to be forward thinking and to fight for rights in Guatemala, because you always get this sense of resistance and of the past. So I think Guatemala has done a lot of progress in these topics, but we've seen it being challenged at this moment. And another thing that I wanted to talk about was how this idea of gay fear is always played out in politics, and how our identities are, you know, used as a card at the game every time that they want to do something else. So it's being proven, and I'm writing about it profoundly, that how at really specific anti-democratic moments, gay fear or LGBT fear in a way, you know, there's not a better term, but has been historically used in Guatemala to suppress and also to advance a really co-opted state agenda. We had a big anti-corruption movement in 2015. It was really famous, Guatemala, because our president quit because of the pressure. But they use that anti-gay rhetoric or anti-LGBT rhetoric. I'm sorry, but gay fear is the term in English, but we need a better term. I'll use LGBT fear to address these and suppress anti-corruption international body that was helping us in this state. And also 1 year ago, when the main anti-corruption prosecutor was fired and expelled, almost expelled and criminalized from the country, our president passed a bill to recognize families and the institution of family, which basically, you know, alienates LGBT people, but also it basically states that, you know, heterosexuality is the only valid way of being. And this is not just a challenge for LGBT people. There's a lot of families that don't fit, you know, that standard model of a male and a female. So I think that it's really challenging to see how non-LGBT people have to believe in this, you know, and the challenges that we see in this. So in these past 5 years, we've seen how corruption has used this rhetoric against LGBT identities to pass on laws, to pass on public policy, and other things that they're just using to basically surpass our rights, but also to benefit from corruption. And I think that's something we need to address, because at times when we talk about LGBT rights, and I think we all have been through this, they're like, oh, let's go to the health department because it's HIV, or let's go to, and it's kind of like put in a separate position, and it's not talking a more general and, you know, holistic way as human rights for everyone. And I think that's really a challenge that we also face. We need to be aware and talk and be more involved in how our rights or the rights of this specific group not only help this group, but help societies be better, and how we are an asset for society. So I think that sums it up, but we can continue to talk more, because there's a lot of things that, and this couple of weeks that we've been here together, we realize how the situations in our country can connect, but also how the challenges that we face, we need to be creative and aware of our contexts.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your incredibly insightful remarks here. I mean, one of the things that's striking me that, you know, is common in what all of you have said is, you know, we're not a homogenous group. We are, however, bound together by societal forces larger than us, right, which use our various identities to mount a unified attack against us. So, you know, Guatemala, as Danny just talked about, has been in the news not in a good way with this law that they passed last week. You know, all of you spoke about the challenges that you face in your own organizations, finding the path that you're working on, but doing it obviously in the context where our broader community faces tremendous challenges brought about by the role of the church. Goodness me, so much to talk about there. You know, societal, or I mean, homophobia and transphobia as a political weapon, often stirred up around election times and other ways to mobilize people against us. Pressure on us when we make progress forward. The opposition finds ways to come together to push back against that pressure. I mean, there's so many big issues around how we as individual organizations, as how we carve out the work that we do, but do it in the context, working with people in our broader community. There's a couple of specific questions that I actually want to ask, but I'd like actually to ask all of you very briefly. A friend of ours on the chat here from Miami wanted to know a little bit more in Haiti about what is the framework for trans folks. Do you have legal protections at all? Is there any possibility of gender marker change? And actually, since this is a huge, obviously, area of concern for all of us, no matter what part of the work that we are doing, and, you know, coming from this understanding that as, you know, whatever advocacy we do, we need to also continually be aware of the, you know, the most marginalized within our communities, which is often trans people, and in the US, trans women of color, for instance. So I am curious whether each of you can just speak a little bit about the state of trans rights in your own country. But let's start with you, Dominique, since the question came to you.
Yes, I've been reading the question, and I will start by saying that legal framework in Haiti regarding, like, specific to any marginalized group does not exist. Even for the women, it's pretty difficult. And they have been trying, the human rights activists, the feminists have been trying for a long time to create the possibility to have specific laws regarding marginalized groupment specifically for women. But so far they have been not that successful. So this is to answer that it is in the light of that, it is pretty difficult for a transgender person to have any bills whatsoever that will be specific to their needs and what they are looking for as legal framework that recognize them. And for gender markers, I could say that institutions from the government side have been trying to put in place some I won't say recognition, but some kind of ways to identify certain person of the trans community, but it only focuses on the male. The male, why? Because they've been working in the framework of HIV, not in the framework of human rights institution that are trying to acknowledge the right of any marginalized person, specifically for transgender community. And so far, the only legal framework that we could rely on are the convention and the treaties that the government have signed for many years. But even though they did sign it, that doesn't mean that they do apply it in country. It is, and other legal framework that we could say that is in a certain way advantaging us, and like we take advantage of that because anyway we are Asian citizens and we pay taxes. We do have documentation that state us as Haitians, and that is it. As Asian, we are entitled to certain access of justice, right, and health, but that is it as citizens. But as Rowan mentioned, it's most time for marginalized groupment, they see us as second-class citizens, which means that yes, we are Haitian citizens, but we do not have access of these, and nobody really cares about that. Only institutions that are working in the framework of human rights, and that's why we always encourage grassroots organizations to provide certain support in terms of human rights tools. And most grassroots institutions, even before they will be focusing on HIV issues or mental issues. I won't say mental issues, I would say health issues. It's only now that mental health issues is becoming really widespread and something that everybody wants to really put forward. But before, most institutions were only focusing on HIV. And now they realize that without the framework of human rights and recognizing human rights for everybody, it is pretty difficult to come to a point where HIV would be the least of our problems. So now they are trying to put forward some kind of support so that can happen. But so far, there is no legal framework that recognizes us.
Thanks, Dominique. Let's just go around the room. Roanne in Barbados, yes, no?
Yeah, I think this is a great question and something that we should speak about deliberately. So thanks for raising it, Jean. I think it's important to just note that in Barbados, Black trans women birthed the LGBTQ plus movement for a long time, and for decades and decades. They were the only ones who were brave enough to be visible and advocate for all of us, not just trans issues, but for all of us. So in the 60s and 70s, before the HIV epidemic happened, there was a huge national pageant called the Queen of the Bees pageant in Barbados, where Black trans women would participate in this pageant and this show, and it used to attract like national audiences. And then as the HIV epidemic happened and a lot of fear started happening, that dwindled and people really began demonizing them. But that didn't stop them from occupying space. And it's so interesting because Black trans women are the most marginalized group within LGBT persons in Barbados, but they've always been the ones who are most active, most visible, and like unafraid to just claim space for themselves. So the first organization in Barbados that was focused on LGBTQ issues was founded in the 90s, and it was called United Gays and Lesbians Against AIDS Barbados, but it was started by a trans woman named Dee Dee Winston, and she's still fighting for LGBTI rights today. And over the past few years, there have been so many organizations that have popped up. So for example, there's one called Butterfly Barbados, which is led by another Black trans woman named Raven Gill. Currently, there's a case before the IACHR, which is challenging the criminalization of same-sex intimacy. And that was brought forward by a Black trans woman named Alexa Hoffman. And there's an organization called Seed Barbados, which is led by another Black trans woman, Davina Emmanuel, and that focuses on providing services and just like life skills to trans youth who are living within urban areas. And I think that just says a lot to the power that trans people have and the resilience. But it's sad that a lot of the time their stories are really just like focused by stories of trauma. I think there's so much more to trans people and their experiences and their lives and the trauma that they experience. I think it's really important to center trans joy. And I find it sad that even though within Barbados, we're making progress when it comes to LGBTQI plus issues, but quite often we see trans people being left behind. So within our legal framework, there's no recognition of trans identities. It's very binary. And then we see that there's just no space for recognition of trans and non-binary people. So organizations have really been pushing to include trans identities and gender identity to be named as a factor to be protected. So Barbados, for the first time in its history last year, passed a non-discrimination bill, which named sexual orientation as a grounds for protection. And that was a really big deal. And it was on the basis of employment. So now it's illegal to discriminate against somebody because of their sexual orientation when it comes to employment, but it didn't say anything about gender identity. So we find that happens often, even if there's progress being made, it's just progress for a tiny piece of people. And it's not fair, because trans people are the ones who are really pushing to make progress. So I think there just needs to be a lot more of an intersectional approach and an inclusive approach to the work that's being done. And it is happening slowly but surely. But trans people deserve to live their lives free of violence, and they deserve to be able to walk down the streets without being assaulted or attacked. And something that we've been doing over the past 2 years as well is making sure that we have gender affirming care in the services that we offer. So She Barbados has also worked with the Barbados Family Planning Association and another organization called Equals to provide safe access to sexual and reproductive services, and we really push to make sure that gender affirming services, whether it be access to hormone replacement therapy or mental health care or just like general physical health, we made sure that we continue to push that this is trans inclusive, because quite often trans people face even more barriers to accessing services. For example, if they go to a public clinic, they can't even make it inside because the security guard is at the front asking them if they're a man or a woman. And it's just ridiculous, you know? A lot of the time they can't make reports at a police station because the police are laughing at them and subjugating them even more. And what happens is a lot of people leave the country and are moving to the US, to Canada, to the UK, and then they're coming over to these countries and experiencing racism that they didn't experience at home. So it becomes a double-edged sword. So yeah, I think what needs to happen is trying to make sure that trans people feel included within the movement and feel affirmed in their citizenship and their right to be in their countries. And I think we're getting there slowly but surely.
Thanks, Roanne. A lot to think about there. You mentioned the IACHR, so actually that makes me want to go to Larissa. So your country led on a big decision of the court a couple of years ago, which of course had implications for the broader movement for marriage and so on. But I'm wondering, we've yet to see that decision implemented or used really as precedent anywhere else in the region, or the signatories of the convention. But I am wondering, have you been able to leverage that in any way for protections for trans people, and what is the state of play in your country, Costa Rica?
Yes, indeed. Well, with the advisory opinion 24 of the Inter-American Court, we were able to achieve equal marriage, but also to achieve the right for, or to recognize the right of trans people to be able to change their names to correspond with their gender identity. But at this point, they are not able to change their sex assigned at birth on their IDs, and that has been like a big challenge. Even though the advisory opinion says they should be able, or they should be allowed to change the sex assigned at birth. So that is something that is not happening right now. And also I would like to address other issues regarding that, because sometimes we, as I said before, like we made everything like turn around the equal marriage, but there are a lot of other issues and problems like hate crimes, especially for trans women that are sex workers, all the violence they live, not just from society and the state, but also because they're sex workers or forced to be sex workers, corrective rapes, hate speech. And those are issues or problems that have not been addressed at this point, 2020 in Costa Rica. And I believe one of the main problems we're having is that the international projection of Costa Rica is that we are a country that respects human rights, that has like a proper legal frame to protect human rights. And to be honest, that is not especially the case, or is not quite right, especially now after the presidential elections, and the person that has been elected president has says that he will like delete everything regarding what has been called gender ideology. That is basically everything related to sexual and reproductive rights, discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. So at this point, we are fearing that not only we will not be able to overcome the problems that we had already, but we might have some sort of backlash, and we will lose whatever we had. I know it's hard, because I mean the legal frame is not something you can manipulate and delete it like right away, but we will know that the violence from society, from the state, might go higher and higher. And especially in a country where the funding is not really available, and maybe we don't have the technical tools, and it is not something that the world is expecting, I'm very, very afraid for what is about to come. We don't know what will happen if we, because we have seen in other countries such as Paraguay, for example, where the term gender is not even allowed to be said in any document from the state. So it's we'll have to see, but right now we're trying to organize things so we can at least not lose whatever is that we won already.
Well, thank you and good luck with that. We're coming to the end. We have one more speaker on this topic, and then I'm just going to give you all a heads up. After that, I want to do a quick one sentence from each of you for your hopes for the next year, your hopes and your dreams for the upcoming year. So think about that. Danny, well, if you very briefly, if you don't mind, answer the question, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, I sent a link to a bill that's been discussed regarding stating trans identity as a disorder that has implications in education, schools, and media, and also like the state discourse regarding this. And I wanted to tell that there's a lot of issues. People can, present as they are in their identity documents, but we don't have gender marker and other legal recognitions. And one of the main problems is that also because of our past, a lot of issues has been raised are always, related to STD prevention and never to actual recognition of civil rights. So that's why we founded this organization, and that's the work we've been doing. In 2019, I presented in Congress with some Congress people a law that will add to our current anti-discrimination law gender identity, but that didn't pass. And we have had a lot of trials at it. We're trying now for addressing it more by litigation so we can, connect it to the advisory opinion we were discussing it before, but it's a challenge that we have. And in that sense, I will just like to say that I expect for more openness in the conversation and for media to be fair with LGBT people, because I think that we at times really fall into the narrative game that people that are against us play. And we need to be better and not fall into the game they set for us. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, of course, we could go on for hours. I mean, this is a remarkable conversation. I want to thank each of you for opening up and sharing with us. So as I said, let's just go around and let's share our hopes for the next year in one sentence or less. Why don't, Dominique, why don't you start us off?
It's very limited, one sentence, but what I wish for and we are working toward that goal is at least to provide the support of and the possibility for transgender person in Haiti to be able to at least start their gender identity recognition process. And I don't know, we are trying to find a path for that, and that is one of my hope for the next year.
Well, we're all with you on that one. We stand behind you. Roanne.
I have so many wishes. It's hard to put it into one sentence. But I think concisely, I would say that I wish and I hope for people on all levels, at an institutional level, but also at a general societal level, to stop being afraid of diversity, because I feel that that is at the root of a lot of the issues that we're facing. Stop being afraid of diversity and celebrate each other for our differences and recognize the humanity of LGBT people.
Thank you. Larissa.
Yeah, it's very hard. I have so many hopes. It's impossible. We should have like another hour just for that. But I'm just gonna mention changes about two issues that I have not yet raised. And it's to overcome the recognition of conscious objection for any state representative regarding LGBTIQ+ rights. And that is something that has been recognized in Costa Rica, and that means like any state representative can say, I'm not gonna do anything related to persons LGBTIQ+. And the other one is to achieve a framework for protection to human rights defenders, especially in a context where we are fearing more violence, because we don't have anything related to that. So I think those would be like my two main hopes about issues that I had not talked before.
Thank you. And finally, but not least, briefly, Danny.
I think that my hope is that we can also see how this interconnects to things in general, and so we can see us as part of society, and that society can see us as an integral part. And we came up with this thing that the society loses every time we lose. And we need to be aware of that. I want our societies to win more. Tired of seeing our societies losing.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. We all want to see our societies benefit from treating us with more dignity, more respect, celebrating who we are, engaging with us, including us, and allowing us to bring our full and wonderful selves to the societies in which we live. I want to thank each one of you for being here, for being part of this program. I want to thank Stephanie and Maggie for the amazing work that you're doing at Columbia in providing the resources and support to bring these advocates together so that we can have these kind of exchanges. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to meet everybody and to host this amazing panel. And so with that, thank you to everyone who's joined us for the hour, for staying with us, for asking your questions, and for being part of this amazing conversation. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Till next time.
Bye. Thank you, Jen.